Hi class, in this video I'm going to work some homework examples from section 6.4. This is factoring with special forms. The two forms that we talked about in class are difference of squares and perfect square trinomials. And what this chart shows you is that there's a special format for the difference of squares and then how you're going to come up with the answer. And so the problem is going to look like a squared minus b squared. But the answer is going to be a minus b times a plus b. So it's going to follow that same pattern every time we work a difference of squares problem. The second special form that we talked about in class are perfect square trinomials. And this is in the format of a trinomial. And it's a squared plus or minus 2 times a times b plus b squared. And then the answer is going to be a plus or minus b quantity squared. Now, the reason I'm saying plus or minus is because it could either be a plus sign right after the a squared. If it's a plus sign, the answer will have a plus sign. If it's a minus sign right after a squared, the answer is going to have a minus sign. And then one thing I want you just to know is that when you take the square root of a squared, it equals a. And same when you take the square root of b squared, it equals b. Okay, so let's take a look at this first example. This says factor the difference of two squares. So if you look in the purple box, the format of the answer, we're going to have two parentheses. The first position is going to be the square root of x squared, which is x. The second position is going to be the square root of 64, which is 8. And then in any order, one set of parentheses needs to have a plus sign and one needs to have a minus sign, and that's your answer. Okay, next, again, this is factor the difference of two squares, so I'm going to set up the answer according to the template in the purple box. Okay, the square root of the first term, 4y squared, is 2y, so that goes in the first position of each parenthesis. The square root of 49 is 7, and then again, in any order, one needs to be a plus sign, one needs to be a minus sign. We can do difference of squares with a fraction as well. So it's still going to set up the same way. Draw your two parentheses. The square root of v squared is v. And then the square root of 25 over 81 is the same as if we did the square root of 25 over the square root of 81. And so the square root of 25 is 5. The square root of 81 is 9. And so we're going to put 5 over 9 in the second position of each parenthesis. One needs to be plus sign, one needs to be minus. And because the original problem had a fraction, it is okay for you to leave a fraction here in the answer. You do not need to move the denominator to the coefficient. Just keep it exactly how it is. Okay, so let's talk about the perfect square trinomial. And it's okay if you don't recognize it to be a perfect square trinomial. If you look back up at the purple box, the way you can recognize if it's a perfect square trinomial is if the first and the last term are perfect squares, and then the middle term is the square root of the first term times the square root of the second term times 2. Sometimes it's easy to figure that out, sometimes it's not. So take a look at this one. X squared is the first term, and that's a perfect square number. 81 is the last term, and that's also a perfect square number. If we were to take a square root of x squared, that's x. If we took the square root of 81, that's 9. If we multiplied those together and doubled it, it would be 18x. And so that proves that this is a perfect square trinomial. And so the answer format is going to be x plus 9 quantity squared. Okay, so let's try that again. It says factor the perfect square trinomial. And I want you to notice that this one is larger. So if you were to factor it the traditional way, like multiplying 16 times 49, you can certainly do it that way. It would just take a lot longer. And so 16z squared is a perfect squared. That's 4z. 49 is a perfect squared. So if you multiply those two together and then double it, this is 28z times 2. And sure enough, that does equal 56z. So this is a perfect square trinomial. So we can just follow the answer template, which will be taking the square root of the first term, which is 4z, the square root of the last term, which is 7. And then because the first operation was addition. Addition is going to be part of the answer, and it's going to be quantity squared, and that's your final answer. That's all for this video. Please let me know if you have any other questions about this homework.